I want to take a retraction or a moment to say I was too hard on Bridget Brink. And she has left foreign service. She's no longer the ambassador to Ukraine. And now she's speaking candidly. And so let's talk about what the incident was. So back on April 4th, there was a missile strike on a playground. You remember that? Okay, so her post was U.S. Ambassador to Ukraine, April 4th, horrified that tonight a ballistic missile struck near a playground and restaurant in Kryvyi. More than 50 people injured, 16 killed, including 6 children. This is why the war must end. Okay, so she's saying what the Trump administration wants her to say, and she works for the Trump administration. This is why the war must end. She's highlighting that, but she's not saying that Russia did it. Like, we kind of know Russia did it, but okay. And then so other people would complain on here, and I was one of them. Ambassador Brink is better than this and doesn't believe a word of what the new administration says about the war, yet she elides Russian war crime, eludes, I think is what they were trying to say, Russian war crimes, now to stay in Donald Trump's good graces. Who fired this ballistic missile? She should do the honorable thing and resign. Well, it turns out she did. Now, I complained about this as well, and I want to say, I get it. I understand where it was. She was in a very tough spot. So I want to retract any harsh words that I might have had for her at the time. Here she is on Face the Nation explaining what was going on, why she quit her post. Bridget Brink, who recently quit her post as a U.S. ambassador to Ukraine, tells Face the Nation that she left because Trump administration policy was to put pressure on the victim. Let's hear what she has to say.
I resigned from Ukraine and also from the Foreign Service because the policy since the beginning of the administration was to put pressure on the victim, Ukraine, rather than on the aggressor, Russia. I fully agree that the war needs to end, but I believe that peace at any price is not peace at all. It's appeasement.
Yeah, of course, the war needs to end. Everybody agrees the war needs to end. That's not a problem, but we have to call the aggressor, and she's willing to do that now that she is out of service to the United States government, which she had to be in line with the president's policies before. Okay, let's keep listening.
And as we know from history, appeasement only leads to more war.
Mm-hmm. And to be clear, you are a career diplomat. So that means you serve regardless of who is the president of the United States and what party they come from. And in fact, when you tried to leave post in January, Secretary Rubio asked you to stay on in Kyiv, as I understand it. You were there for a number of months until April. What specifically with this policy is a problem for you? Because you worked at post under the Trump administration. Was there a trigger that made you say, we're getting it so wrong?
Well, I would say it wasn't a hasty, rash decision. It was one that I took over the first 3 months of the administration. But the first sign was the Oval Office meeting
in February.
Yeah, and this was pretty clear that there was just overt hostility towards Zelensky, and the whole world saw that, and it shook the world.
In February,
President Trump and President Zelensky.
Yes, where I saw that our approach is to put pressure on Ukraine and not pressure on Russia.
Yeah, and that's exactly the wrong direction. Okay, here she is. She talks about this in a post in a Michigan newspaper. She went back to live in Michigan. Michigan is in the middle of the United States, just below Canada. I'm talking for those of you who are not Americans and don't know where it is. Wow, I resigned because of Trump's foreign policy, former ambassador to Ukraine, Bridget Brink. Quote, I have just returned to Michigan after 3 years of the toughest job of my life as a U.S. ambassador to Ukraine, where I supported our democratic ally against the brutal, unprovoked aggression of the Russian Federation. Now, she couldn't talk about it like this, the brutal, unprovoked aggression of the Russian Federation. In fact, right now, they're trying to change G7 language to not call this illegal, what Russia has done in invading Ukraine. I have previously served 5 presidents, Republican and Democrat. Unfortunately, the Trump, and by the way, this is normal. This is what ambassadors do. They do the will of the president. They're as if they're the president in the presence of that other country, right? So they're supposed to be in line. Okay, unfortunately, the Trump administration policy from the outset has been to pressure the victim, Ukraine, rather than the aggressor, the Russian Federation. Therefore, I could no longer conscientiously pursue the administration's policy and considered it my duty to resign. After nearly 30 years of serving our country, I'm retiring from my post as ambassador to the Ukraine. Why does the Russian invasion of Ukraine matter to the United States? This matters because of the way how we handle this war will say a lot to both our friends and our enemies. Absolutely spot on 100%. This is not a partisan issue. This is an American issue. We are projecting to the world either you can trust us or you can't trust us. Okay. If we allow Putin to redraw borders by force, he won't stop at Ukraine. If Putin is to be believed, he wants to revive the imperial past, and he can't do that without endangering the security of our NATO allies. And if Putin succeeds, he will send signals to China that will undermine the security balance in Asia and all around the world. This will have profound implications for America's security and prosperity. Exactly, that's spot on. I may no longer be an American diplomat, but I will never stop believing in the need for American leadership to secure our future and provide a beacon of hope to so many others around the world. That's right. And if you step away from that and you create a leadership vacuum, who's going to fill it? China? Russia? Who? Other bad actors? Okay, here she is on CNN talking about the same kind of thing. And now she's a little bit less restrained, well, a lot less restrained. And let's hear what she has to say now.
And discussion, and this is a core part of what the career Foreign Service does.
Let's go back to what we first started talking about, and that is the substance of what's going to happen from now. So in your view, the Turkey talks, did they achieve anything?
I think that Putin is stringing us along, and I think we've seen that over a number of...
You don't really hear that from the upper echelons in the government. Oh, Putin's stringing us along. No, you hear this from commentators. You might hear it from foreign diplomats, but you don't hear it within the U.S. government, even though that's what it looks like is happening.
Different meetings and events. This is the modus operandi of Russia, to say one thing and to do another. And I think this is why it's really important to call a spade and to put more pressure on Russia together with partners and allies in Europe.
Why do you think they're not doing that? For instance, the readout of the call was that it was very pleasant. President Putin, or from the Kremlin, I think, came the description that neither Putin nor Trump wanted to even hang up and say goodbye to each other.
You hang up. No, you hang up. No, you hang up. No, you hang up.
They were having such a good time. There was no mention of a ceasefire, apparently, and there was no...
Wait, wasn't a ceasefire the whole point for the last couple of months? What am I missing?
Move towards sanctions, even though the US and Europe had floated both those things, ceasefire and sanctions, if Putin didn't agree. Why do you think this is still the White House, at least its public position towards Russia?
Well, I think Putin's goal is pretty clear. He wants to subjugate Ukraine, divide Europe, and weaken us.
And she couldn't say that before. And so now she's unrestrained. She can say what she wants, and she has moral authority to be able to do it.
Wants to keep us on side. So he clearly is going to do everything possible to make it seem like we can work together and potentially agree to things like starting negotiations to end the war.
Yeah, so Putin's going to play along as if he's actually preparing a memo to talk about this, but we have to get these agreements before we can get a ceasefire. So, yeah.
Then to slow roll those negotiations or to create demands that are completely unacceptable on basic principles and values, not just to Ukraine, but to the United States, like allowing borders to be changed by force and recognizing those actions. So I can't explain why exactly we are doing what we're doing. I can just say that based on my experience and very long experience dealing in this part of the world with the Russians, is that you have to be very clear on what your red lines are. You have to make sure that you don't give concessions in advance.
And which is exactly what we're doing. We're conceding all kinds of things.
And once agreements are made, they have to be verified. It's really a trust but verify situation.
Trust but verify. We'll come back to that in just a moment. In in contrast to this, Marco Rubio is before the Senate or the House of Representatives. He's being asked if Putin is a war criminal. Here's how he answers, because he knows he can't answer what I know he knows.
The person we're negotiating with, Vladimir Putin, is he a war criminal?
Well, I think you can look at instances that have happened there and certainly characterize them as war crimes, but our intent is to end the war.
Is he a war criminal?
We can't end the war without talking to
No,
Mr.
that's
Putin.
pretty simple. Is he a war criminal?
Well, that's
this man we're negotiating with, Vladimir Putin. Is he a war criminal? That's not tough.
But what? I'm trying to answer your question by.
He's trying to answer the question without answering the question, because he's bound by the administration's policy. So the upside of there's a downside of Rubio being there, and there's an upside. The downside is that he's got to kind of play along with Trump's tune. The upside is hopefully he can help shift it. There's a conflict within the administration, and Rubio is the guy that apparently is the most hawkish of the bunch, but he publicly can't say something other than this. But it's a very sad place to be. Bridget Brink, her last comment was trust by verify. That's a comment that Ronald Reagan made, trust but verify, talking about the Soviets. And I think that's where we need to be, not just trust and continue to trust and make concessions and give and give and give. Trust but verify. All right, my friends, that's all that I have for this video. What do you think about what you saw here? Put it in the comments below. Thank you for your time, the likes, the shares, and the subscribes. And thank you for being the kind of person that cares about Ukraine.